I knew something was wrong the moment the second line appeared. It wasn't faint. It wasn't questionable. It was clear. Steady. Unforgiving. Two pink lines staring back at me like they already knew my future before I did. My fingers trembled as I held the test over the bathroom sink, the cheap plastic creaking slightly under the pressure of my grip. "That's impossible," I whispered, but the word sounded weak, like it didn't belong in this version of my life anymore. I hadn't made a mistake. I couldn't have. Because there was one thing I was absolutely certain about: my husband had never touched me. The house was silent outside the bathroom door. Too silent. The kind of silence that didn't feel peaceful, but controlled. Measured. Like even the walls were listening. I set the test down carefully, as if moving too fast would somehow change the result, and pressed both hands against the marble counter to steady myself. Cold. Everything in this place was cold. The marble, the air, the way the chandeliers cast light without warmth. I closed my eyes, and for a second, I wasn't here anymore. I was back in that apartment. Peeling paint. Flickering kitchen light. The smell of burnt coffee and overdue bills stacked like a warning I kept ignoring. "Emily, don't open the door," my dad had said that night, his voice shaking in a way I had never heard before. But it was already too late. The knock wasn't a knock. It was a decision. Heavy. Certain. Final. When I opened it, they didn't push their way in. They didn't need to. Men like that didn't ask for permission. And behind them, he stood there. Victor Kane. 65 years old. Impeccably dressed. Silver threading through his dark hair like time had touched him but never dared to slow him down. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten. He just looked at my father once, then at me. And somehow, that was worse. "You can't pay," he said calmly, like he was stating the weather. "So I'll take something else." I remember my heart pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear it. I remember stepping forward before my father could speak. Before he could beg. "Take me," I said. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just knew there was no other way out. His eyes shifted back to me. Slow. Calculating. And then, he nodded. Just like that. No hesitation. No surprise. Like I had just confirmed something he already decided hours ago. The wedding happened 3 days later. No family. No friends. Just signatures and silence. And after that, nothing. No affection. No anger. No love. He gave me a room bigger than my entire old apartment. Clothes I never asked for. Security I never wanted. But he never crossed the line that would make any of this feel real. I wasn't a wife. I was an arrangement. A solution. A payment. And now. I looked back at the test on the counter, my chest tightening as reality pressed in from every side. 2 lines. One truth I couldn't explain. Because if he never touched me, then how was this even possible? And that's when I heard it. The soft click of the door unlocking behind me. I froze. I didn't turn around. I didn't breathe. But I felt him. His presence filled the room before he even spoke. "Emily," Victor said quietly. And somehow, he didn't sound surprised. He sounded like he'd been waiting. I did not turn around because I already knew what I would see if I did, his reflection standing behind me in the mirror, composed, unreadable, like nothing in this world had the power to surprise him, and somehow that terrified me more than anything else, because I was falling apart and he was completely still. "You should not be in here," I said quietly, my voice thinner than I intended, but he did not respond to that. He never responded to what did not matter, instead his gaze shifted past me, not to my face, but to the counter, to the small piece of plastic I had not had time to hide, and the air changed, not louder, not sharper, just heavier, like something unseen had settled between us. "How long have you known?" he asked, his tone calm, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something precise, like he was measuring every second of my silence. "A few minutes," I answered, forcing myself to turn now, to face him, because I refused to look weak, even if my hands were still trembling at my sides. His eyes met mine briefly, then dropped again to the test, and for a moment I thought he might deny it, dismiss it, say it was wrong, but he did not. He simply stepped closer, slow, deliberate, stopping just short of touching me. "He never touched me, you are certain?" he asked, and I let out a quiet, humorless breath. "That is what the test says," I replied, and then the question that had been building inside me broke through before I could stop it. "How is this even possible?" The words came out sharper now, stronger, because fear was turning into something else, something closer to anger. "You never." I stopped myself, but he understood anyway. Of course he did, he always did, and that was the problem. He knew things before I said them, before I even fully understood them myself. His jaw tightened slightly, just enough for me to notice, and then he looked at me again, really looked this time, like he was confirming something. "No," he said quietly, and that single word made my stomach drop, because it was not denial, it was agreement, it was confirmation, and that made everything worse. "Then explain it," I demanded, my voice rising despite myself, because nothing about this made sense, because I was trapped in a life I never chose and now my own body was betraying me in ways I could not understand. But he did not answer immediately. Instead he reached past me, picking up the test with careful fingers, studying it for a brief moment before setting it back down exactly where it had been, precise, controlled, like even chaos had to follow his rules. "You were not chosen randomly," he said finally, his voice lower now, quieter, but heavier with meaning, and I felt my chest tighten as the words sank in. "What does that mean?" I asked, my pulse quickening again, but he did not look away this time. His eyes held mine steadily, unflinching. "It means," he continued, each word deliberate, "that this was always part of the arrangement." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer, the air harder to breathe. "What arrangement?" I whispered, because I already knew I was not going to like the answer, because nothing about this had ever been simple, and he took one final step back, creating distance again, restoring that invisible line he never crossed. "You will understand soon," he said, calm as ever, and that was when I realized something that made my blood run cold. He was not surprised by this, he was not confused, he was not even concerned, he was prepared, and somehow that was the most terrifying part of all, because it meant this was never an accident, it meant this was a plan, and I was already inside it. I did not sleep that night, not even for a second, because every time I closed my eyes I saw those two lines again, clear and undeniable, and every time I opened them I saw the ceiling above me, high and unfamiliar, a reminder that this was not my life, not really, just something I had been placed into without warning, without choice. The sheets felt too soft, the room too quiet, like even the air was controlled, measured, owned, just like everything else in this house, including me. I turned onto my side and stared at the clock on the nightstand. 2:17 a.m., then 2:46, then 3:12, time moved but nothing changed, and somewhere in the distance I could hear footsteps, steady, deliberate, not rushed, never rushed. Victor did not rush, he did not react, he anticipated, and that thought alone made my chest tighten again, because if he had anticipated this, then what exactly had he planned? I pushed myself up slowly, my bare feet touching the cold floor as I walked toward the window. The city stretched out below, lights flickering in the distance, free, alive, nothing like this place. From up here everything looked normal, peaceful even, like nothing dark could exist behind those glowing windows, but I knew better now. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried to think, really think, not panic, not spiral, just understand, because if there was one thing I had learned since the night he walked into my life, it was that confusion was dangerous here. Not knowing meant losing control. And I had already lost too much. "You were not chosen randomly," his voice echoed in my head, calm, certain, like a fact that did not need explanation, and I hated that. I hated how he could say something like that and leave me with nothing but questions, because it meant he held all the answers, and I held none. My hand instinctively moved to my stomach, resting there without pressure, without certainty, just contact, like I needed to feel something real, something mine, but even that did not feel safe anymore, because if this was part of his plan, then what did that make me, what did that make this child? A door clicked open somewhere behind me, soft, controlled. I did not turn this time. I just watched the reflection in the glass as he entered, his silhouette appearing behind mine, tall, composed, unshaken. "You should be resting," he said, his voice low, almost neutral, like we were discussing something ordinary, like nothing about this situation was unraveling inside me. I let out a quiet breath, my eyes still fixed on the city lights. "I do not think I can," I replied honestly, because there was no point pretending anymore, not with him, never with him. There was a brief pause, and then I saw him move closer in the reflection, stopping at the same distance he always did. Close enough to feel, never close enough to touch. "Your routine will change starting tomorrow," he said, and something in his tone shifted, not softer, not harsher, just more final, like a decision already made. "What kind of change?" I asked, finally turning to face him, my voice steady now, because fear was slowly being replaced by something sharper, something more focused. His eyes met mine without hesitation. "You will not be working anymore," he said, and the words hit harder than I expected, not because I loved that job, but because it was the last thing that belonged to me, the last piece of a life that felt real. "You cannot just decide that," I replied, a flicker of resistance breaking through, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw something in his expression, not anger, not irritation, but recognition, like he had expected this response, like he had been waiting for it. "I already have," he said simply, and then, after a brief pause, he added, "From this point forward, your priority is no longer survival, Emily, it is preservation." The word lingered in the air between us, heavy, deliberate, and I felt my heartbeat shift again, slower this time, deeper, because I understood what he was really saying. I was no longer just a payment, no longer just a solution to a debt. I was something else now, something planned, something protected, and that terrified me even more than before, because protection meant value, and value meant purpose, and I still did not know what that purpose was, but I was starting to understand one thing clearly. I was never meant to leave this life, not from the moment I opened that door, not from the moment I said those words, "Take me," because this was never about the debt. It was about something far more calculated, something that had been set in motion long before I even knew his name. The next morning did not feel like morning at all. It felt like a transition, like something had quietly shifted while I was not looking, and now everything was different even though nothing looked different. The sunlight still filtered through the tall windows in soft, controlled beams. The house staff still moved silently through the halls like they were part of the structure itself, but when I stepped out of my room, I felt it immediately, the attention, subtle but unmistakable, like invisible lines had been drawn around me overnight. I was no longer just living here, I was being watched, monitored, preserved. His word echoed again in my mind, preserved. I walked down the staircase slowly, my hand brushing against the polished railing, grounding myself in something solid as I tried to ignore the tightness in my chest. At the bottom, the dining room was already set, everything precise, everything in place. Including him. Victor sat at the head of the table, dressed as always. Immaculate, composed, like time itself adjusted around him. He did not look up immediately when I entered, but I knew he was aware of me. He was always aware. "Sit," he said after a moment, not a command raised in volume, but one that carried weight all the same. I hesitated for half a second before doing as he said, because hesitation was the only resistance I had left that he could not take from me. A plate was already waiting, untouched, exactly how I liked it, and that realization made my stomach twist, because it meant someone had been paying attention. Maybe him, maybe someone else, but either way, it meant I was being studied. "You will have an appointment this morning," he said, folding his hands together calmly, his gaze finally lifting to meet mine. "Appointment," I repeated, though I already knew the answer, and he nodded once. "A physician will confirm what you already suspect." The words were simple, but the meaning behind them felt heavier, more final. Like this was no longer something uncertain, this was becoming real, structured, controlled. I pushed my fork slightly against the plate but did not take a bite. My appetite had disappeared somewhere between fear and confusion. You arranged this already, I said, not a question, and for the first time, he did not deny it. Yes, he replied, direct, unapologetic, like there was nothing unusual about planning something like this before I had even spoken it out loud. I leaned back slightly, studying him now. Really studying him, the lines of his face, the stillness in his posture, the way nothing about him betrayed emotion unless he allowed it to. You knew, I said quietly, and this time, he did not answer right away. His gaze held mine for a few seconds longer than usual, and then he said something that made everything inside me go still. I prepared for the possibility, not certainty, but not surprise either, something calculated, something expected within a range. And that meant there were variables, and I was one of them. I am not a possibility, I said, my voice steadier now, sharper, because something inside me refused to stay quiet anymore. I am a person. The silence that followed was not empty, it was measured, deliberate, like he was choosing how much truth to give me, and how much to keep. You are both, he said finally, and those 3 words settled over me heavier than anything else he had said so far, because they confirmed what I had started to fear. I was not just here because of a debt, I was part of something larger, something designed, something that had a purpose beyond me. A woman entered the room then, professional, composed, carrying a small leather case. She did not look at me with curiosity or sympathy, only with quiet efficiency. She is ready, Victor said without turning his head, and the woman nodded, stepping closer to me. We should not delay, she added calmly, and I felt my fingers curl slightly against the edge of the table, grounding myself again, holding on to what little control I had left. As I stood up slowly, my legs steady even if everything else was not, and as I followed her toward the door, I realized something that settled deep in my chest, heavy and undeniable. This was not just about confirming a pregnancy, this was about confirming a plan, and I was already too far inside it to walk away. The drive felt longer than it should have, even though the city outside moved at its usual pace, traffic lights changing, people crossing streets, everything continuing like nothing had shifted, but inside the car, everything had. The tinted windows muted the world into something distant and unreachable, and I sat in the back seat with my hands folded tightly in my lap, watching my reflection flicker against the glass, trying to recognize the person staring back at me, but she looked unfamiliar, quieter, more contained, like she already knew she did not belong to herself anymore. The woman beside me, the one Victor had sent, remained silent, professional, her attention fixed forward, like conversation was unnecessary, like this was just another task to complete, and maybe for her it was, but for me, every second felt like a step deeper into something I did not understand. The car slowed smoothly before pulling into a private entrance, the building ahead tall and polished, its glass exterior reflecting the sky like a mirror that hid everything inside. The door opened before I could reach for the handle, and I stepped out onto the pavement, the air cooler here, sharper, like it carried less warmth than the world I remembered. Inside, everything was white and quiet, controlled, the kind of place where nothing unexpected was allowed to happen. The receptionist greeted us without surprise, without question, like she had been expecting me specifically, my name already known before I spoke it. This way, the woman beside me said softly, guiding me down a long hallway, where every step echoed just slightly, reminding me that I was here, that this was real. The room we entered was bright, almost too bright, and for a moment I hesitated at the doorway, my fingers tightening slightly at my sides. You can sit, a voice said gently, and I looked up to see the doctor, calm, composed, her expression neutral but not unkind. She did not ask unnecessary questions, did not offer comfort that felt empty. She simply gestured toward the chair, and I sat, my heartbeat steady but heavy, like it had accepted something my mind was still trying to fight. The examination was quiet, efficient, measured, and I focused on small things to keep myself grounded, the soft hum of the equipment, the faint ticking of a clock on the wall, the steady rhythm of my own breathing, until finally, she stepped back, removing her gloves with careful precision, and looked at me, not with hesitation, not with doubt, but with certainty. You are pregnant, she said, her voice calm, factual, leaving no space for interpretation, and even though I had already known, hearing it spoken out loud made it real in a way nothing else had. My hand moved instinctively again, resting lightly against my stomach, not out of instinct, not yet, but out of disbelief, because this was no longer a question, it was a fact, and facts could not be undone. How far along? I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the weight pressing against my chest. She glanced at the screen, then back at me. Early, she replied, very early, and something about that word echoed in my mind. Early meant beginning, and beginnings meant something had already started before I realized it. The door opened behind me then, soft, controlled, and I did not need to turn to know who it was. I felt it immediately, that same presence, that same stillness that filled every space he entered. Well, Victor said, his voice calm as ever, now we know. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze, searching for something. Anything that looked like surprise, relief, emotion, but there was nothing, only that same quiet certainty, like this moment had already happened in his mind long before we reached it. This changes everything, I said, the words leaving my lips before I could stop them, but he shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly. No, he replied, his eyes steady on mine, this confirms everything. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, because I realized I had been thinking of this as something that disrupted his plans, something unexpected, but I was wrong. This was never a disruption, this was the plan, and I had just stepped fully into it. The ride back felt quieter than before, even though nothing had changed on the outside, the same streets, the same movement, the same city that kept going without noticing that my entire reality had just been rewritten. I sat in the same seat, hands resting in my lap again, but this time they did not feel like mine, they felt like something I was borrowing, something temporary, like everything else in this life. I stared at the passing buildings, counting them without meaning to, trying to hold on to something predictable, something that still followed rules I understood, but every thought kept circling back to the same point. This confirms everything. His words echoed again, calm, certain, like the result had not surprised him at all, like it had simply checked a box on a list he had already completed, and that realization settled deeper now, heavier, because it meant I had never been reacting to his plan. I had been moving exactly where he wanted me to go, without even realizing it. The car slowed as we entered the gates, the iron bars opening without hesitation, like even the house recognized that I belonged here now. The moment I stepped inside, the atmosphere felt different again, not colder, not harsher, just more defined, like lines had been drawn more clearly around me. Staff moved with slightly more awareness, their eyes lowering a fraction quicker, their steps more careful, and I understood then. The confirmation had not just changed things for me, it had changed how everyone here saw me. I was no longer just the girl who arrived unexpectedly, I was something established now, something acknowledged. I walked toward the staircase slowly, but his voice stopped me before I reached it. Emily, he said, and I turned. Because ignoring him was not something I had learned how to do, not yet. He stood near the entrance, having returned without me noticing, his presence filling the space again in that quiet, controlled way that made everything else feel secondary. Come with me, he added, and there was no urgency in his tone, no pressure, just certainty, like the direction had already been decided. I followed him down a different hallway this time, one I had not seen before, the walls darker, the lighting softer, more private, and something about that shift made my chest tighten again, because new places in this house always meant new rules, new layers I had not yet uncovered. He stopped in front of a door and opened it without hesitation, stepping aside slightly for me to enter first, and for a brief second, I considered refusing, just to see what would happen, just to reclaim something small. But I stepped inside anyway, because I already knew the answer. Inside, the room was not what I expected. It was not cold or formal like the rest of the house, it felt different, quieter, almost personal. A desk, shelves, documents arranged with precise order. This was not a guest room or a space for show, this was his space, and that realization alone made me hesitate near the doorway. You wanted answers, he said behind me, closing the door with a soft click that sounded louder than it should have. I turned slowly, my arms crossing slightly without me realizing it, a protective instinct I could not suppress anymore. Yes, I said, because there was no point pretending otherwise. His gaze held mine for a moment, then shifted toward the desk, where a single folder rested, untouched, waiting. he walked over and placed his hand on it, not opening it yet, just resting there like it held something important, something final. "Everything you need to understand is in here," he said calmly. And my heartbeat shifted again, slower, heavier, because I knew that whatever was inside that folder was not going to give me comfort, it was going to give me truth, and truth in this house had never been gentle. "Then open it," I said quietly, my voice steady despite everything pressing against me. He looked at me again, measuring, deciding, and then finally, he opened the folder, turning it slightly so I could see, and the first thing I noticed was my name, printed clearly at the top of the page, not handwritten, not recent, but part of something official, something documented long before I ever stepped into his world, and that was when I understood something that made everything inside me go still. This did not start the night I opened that door, this started long before that, long before the debt, long before the marriage, long before I even knew his name, and whatever was written in that file was going to prove it. My name was printed in bold at the top of the page, Emily Carter, followed by details that made my breath slow, not faster, because shock did not feel like panic, it felt like stillness, like everything inside me had paused just to process what I was seeing: date of birth, address history, employment records, even the diner where I worked, all of it documented with a level of precision that felt invasive, calculated, intentional. My fingers hovered over the paper but did not touch it yet, like contact would make it more real. "This is not possible," I said quietly, but my voice lacked conviction, because deep down I already knew it was. Victor did not respond immediately, he never rushed into explanations, he let the truth settle first, let it sink in until it could not be ignored. "Keep reading," he said calmly, and something in his tone told me that what I had seen so far was only the surface. I forced myself to look further down the page, past the basic information, into sections that should not have existed: medical history, genetic markers, notes I did not understand at first glance, terminology that felt clinical, detached, like I was no longer reading about a person, but about a subject, a case. My stomach tightened, my hand finally pressing lightly against the paper as if grounding myself would help me stay present, and then I saw it, a line highlighted, deliberate, unmistakable: subject exhibits rare compatibility markers for lineage continuation. The words did not make sense at first, not fully, but they did not need to. Because the implication hit before the logic did: compatibility, lineage, continuation, none of those words belonged in a normal life, none of them belonged to me. "What is this?" I asked, my voice lower now, steadier, because fear had shifted into something colder, something sharper. I needed answers, not comfort. Victor stepped closer, not enough to touch, but enough to make his presence impossible to ignore. "It means you were identified," he said, and the simplicity of that sentence made everything inside me tighten. Identified, not chosen, not found, identified, like I had been located, categorized, placed into something larger. Identified for what? I pressed, my eyes lifting to meet his, refusing to look away now, because I would not be kept in the dark anymore, not about my own life, not about this. He held my gaze for a moment, then gestured slightly toward the page. "For the role you now carry," he replied, and my breath caught just slightly, my hand instinctively moving to my stomach again, the connection forming whether I wanted it to or not. "No," I said immediately, shaking my head once, because rejecting it felt like the only control I had left. "You are saying this like it was decided before I even knew you existed," and his expression did not change, not even slightly. "It was," he answered, and the certainty in his voice hit harder than anything else, because there was no hesitation, no doubt, just truth. I stepped back slightly, the distance giving me space to think, to breathe, but it did not help, because the room felt smaller now, tighter, like every wall had moved closer without warning. "You arranged the debt," I said slowly, the realization forming piece by piece, each word heavier than the last. "You knew my father could not pay." His silence confirmed more than denial ever could, and that silence spoke louder than anything else. "You orchestrated all of this," I continued, my voice barely above a whisper now, not because I was weak, but because the truth did not need volume, it carried itself. He did not deny it, he did not interrupt, he simply stood there, letting me reach the conclusion on my own, because he knew I would, because it had always been inevitable. I looked back at the file, at my name printed there like a label, like a designation, not a person, and something inside me shifted, not breaking, but changing, because fear alone was not enough anymore. I needed understanding, I needed clarity. So I was never your wife, I said quietly, the words settling between us, heavy, undeniable, and for the first time, his gaze softened, just slightly, almost imperceptibly. You are exactly what you were meant to be, he said, and that answer did not comfort me, it did not reassure me, it only confirmed what I already feared. This was never about love, never about chance, this was about purpose, and I had been walking toward it long before I ever realized I was being led. The word purpose did not leave my mind, it stayed there, echoing in a way that felt heavier with every second, because purpose meant design, and design meant I had never been free, not really, not even before I stepped into this house. I stared at the file for a long moment longer, then closed it slowly, deliberately, like shutting it would somehow give me back control, but it did not, it only made the silence louder, thicker, pressing against my thoughts until I could not ignore what I already knew. You built my life around this, I said finally, my voice quiet but steady, because I was no longer asking, I was stating, and this time, Victor did not deflect, he did not redirect, he simply watched me, as if this moment mattered more than the others, as if my understanding was part of something he had been waiting for. I ensured the conditions were met, he replied, and the precision of his words made something inside me tighten again. Ensured, not forced, not created, just guided, controlled from a distance, like moving pieces on a board until they reached the exact position he needed. You are talking about my life like it was an experiment, I said, and there was something sharp in my voice now, something that refused to stay quiet any longer, because fear had shifted again, it had turned into something stronger, something that pushed back, even if only slightly. His gaze did not waver, but there was a pause before he answered, a fraction of a second where something unspoken passed between us. No, he said, calm but firm, I am talking about your life as something that matters. The words should have felt different, they should have softened something, but they did not, because they came with conditions, with control, with everything I had just seen in that file. It matters because of what I can give you, I corrected, my hand resting against my stomach again without thinking, the connection now unavoidable, and for the first time, he did not immediately respond. The silence stretched just slightly longer than before, and that was when I realized something subtle but important. He was choosing his next words carefully, not because he lacked control, but because something about this moment required precision. It matters because of what you already are, he said finally, and that answer landed differently, not softer, but deeper, because it shifted the focus away from the plan and onto me, and I did not know whether to trust that or question it. I took a slow breath, forcing my thoughts to settle, because reacting would only keep me where he expected me to be, and I needed to think beyond that, to see something he had not accounted for. You said I was identified, I began, my voice steadier now, more controlled. That means there were others. His expression changed just slightly, not enough for most people to notice. But I did, because I had been watching him closely, learning him in the same way he had studied me. And that slight shift told me I had reached something real, something he had not intended to reveal so quickly. There were, he confirmed, and the simplicity of that answer sent a quiet chill through me, because it meant I had not just been chosen, I had been selected, out of many, for a reason I was only beginning to understand. And they are not here, I continued, my gaze holding his, refusing to look away now, because I needed the truth, all of it. He did not answer immediately. And that silence told me more than words could. It told me that whatever had happened to the others was not part of the story he wanted to tell. Not yet. You are here, he said. Instead, redirecting without denying, and I almost smiled, not because it was comforting, but because it confirmed what I already suspected. He controlled the narrative as much as he controlled everything else, but that did not mean I had to accept it. Then I am not just part of your plan, I said quietly, the realization forming fully now. Solid, undeniable, I am the result you were waiting for. The words settled between us, and for the first time, there was no correction, no adjustment. Just silence, and in that silence, I found something I had not felt since this began, clarity, because I finally understood my position, not as a victim, not as a mistake, but as something intentional, something placed, and that changed everything, not because it made me safe, but because it meant I could stop asking why and start asking what comes next. And as I looked at him, really looked at him, I realized something else just as important. He had planned for everything up to this moment. But what I did next, how I responded, that was something he could not fully predict, and for the first time since I opened that door, I felt something shift inside me, something small but undeniable. Control was not entirely his anymore. I held his gaze longer this time, not out of defiance, but out of understanding, because something had changed between us. Not in him, he was still the same, controlled, precise, always 3 steps ahead, but in me, the fear that once filled every silence had shifted into something sharper, something that did not disappear under pressure, something that stayed, steady and present. Then tell me what happens next, I said, my voice calm, almost even, and that alone felt like a victory I had not expected, because before this, I had only reacted. Now I was asking, choosing, directing, even if it was only a small step. His eyes studied me carefully, not with suspicion, but with something closer to assessment, like he was recalculating, adjusting the variables he thought he already understood. Next, he repeated quietly, and for a brief moment, the room felt different, like the air itself was waiting. You continue, he said, and the simplicity of that answer almost made me laugh, but I did not, because I understood what he meant. Continue did not mean return to normal, it meant move forward within the structure he had already built, within the plan that now included something more, something irreversible. I glanced down for a second, my hand resting lightly against my stomach again, not out of habit this time, but out of awareness, because whether I understood it or not, this changed my place in his world, in his plan, in everything. And if I do not, I asked quietly, lifting my eyes back to his, because this question mattered more than anything else I had said so far. The silence that followed was not immediate, not sharp, it unfolded slowly, like he was giving the question the weight it deserved, and when he finally answered, his voice was still calm, still controlled, but there was something deeper in it now, something that carried more than just authority. You will, he said, not as a threat, not as a command, but as a certainty. And that was when I understood the difference between power and control. Power forced, control guided, and he had never needed to force anything, because everything had already been placed exactly where it needed to be, including me. I took a slow breath, letting the realization settle, not resisting it, not fighting it, just understanding it, because understanding was the only way forward now. You built this entire future, I said, my voice quieter again, but not weaker, and you expect me to just live inside it. His expression did not change, but his answer came without hesitation. I expect you to define it, he said, and that was not what I expected, not at all, because for the first time, he was not telling me what I was, or what I had to be. He was placing something in my hands, something that had not been there before, choice, not complete, not free, but real enough to matter. I looked at him for a long moment, searching for the angle, the hidden meaning, the control behind the words, but there was nothing obvious, just that same steady gaze, waiting, watching, measuring, and I realized something then, something that shifted everything one final time. He had planned for outcomes, for possibilities, for results, but he had not planned for resistance that understood itself, for someone who saw the structure and chose how to move within it. And that was where I existed now, not outside his world, not free from it, but not entirely contained by it either. I stepped back slightly, creating space, not to escape, but to think, to decide, because whatever came next would not just follow his design, it would follow mine as well. Then I will decide what this becomes, I said quietly, and for the first time since this began, the silence that followed did not feel like something closing in, it felt like something opening. And as I turned toward the door, my hand resting once more against the life growing inside me, I understood something clearly. He may have chosen me for a reason, but what I became from this point on, that was no longer something he could fully control. And somewhere behind me, I heard his voice again, softer this time, almost reflective. That is exactly why it had to be you, and this time, I did not stop walking.